Hello and welcome to our first panel, Be a Game Changer panel, War Against Children, Young People's Refugee Perspective. The Ukraine war reveals once again that wars target civilians. The devastating effects on children and young people in particular is evident in the Syrian war, which continues for 11 years now. Whoever can flee, flees. But what comes next for those who have been traumatized and uprooted by the war? And what is the situation like in the host countries? This will be discussed in today's panel as exemplified by Syrian, Lebanon, and Greece. We do have very interesting guests today with us. I want to introduce them very short for you. We do have joining us from the Lebanon, Marie-Claude. She is doctor in anthropology. She's a former university teacher and researcher, and she joined Alpha, a Lebanese nonprofit organization, in 2018 as head of communication and development strategies. And we're going to talk about Alpha and what you do in the Lebanon later in this show. Marie-Claude brought with her today, and we are very happy about this, Hanadi Alouche. She fled Damascus, Syria in 2015. Since then, she lives in Lebanon, in the Bekaa region, and she's now 22 years old. She is married and she has a child, 8-month-old. We are very happy that you're with us today, and we're going to hear your story later on. From Greece, Lesbos is with us Efi Latsouri. She is a founding member of the Pipka Solidarity Camp in Lesbos. It is considered the first open and independent welcoming shelter for refugees fleeing to Greece. And she is with the organization Lesbos Solidarity. The Pipka camp came to a very sad end about 2 years ago. We're going to talk about this later on. In 8 years of existence, more than 30,000 refugees and victims of sea tragedies have been supported by the camp. And what Lesbos Solidarity is doing now on Lesbos, we're going to discuss also later. From Berlin is with us Ferdinand Dürr. Ferdinand Dürr is co-founder of Adopt a Revolution, which was founded in 2011. And it's an organization to support the uprising for freedom, democracy, and human rights in one of the most repressive dictatorships in our time, in Syria. The organization attempts to build a bridge of solidarity between civil society here in Germany and the young civil society in Syria. Welcome to our show, Ferdinand Dürr. And last but not least, from Cologne is with us Florian Gregorczyk. He is a journalist, he is podcaster, he's host of the podcast Everything is Different, War in Europe. And in a former life, he made journalistic pieces on YouTube, and he joined us on 3 different occasions, visiting Kindernothilfe projects in Honduras, Philippines, and also in the Lebanon. And we are very excited that we can show a little piece of this last film from the Lebanon. This is, of course, already a few years back. It's been before the pandemic. It was 2019, I think, about June or something, or the beginning of 2019. What kind of reaction did you had after you released the video on your YouTube channel?
I think, you know, in Europe and especially in Germany, we know a lot about the Syrian struggle, and we have a lot of people that have come to Germany as well. And but that was, you know, during 2015, 2016. But at the point when I released the video in 2019, the discourse had shifted from the welcoming kind of, you know, feeling that was all over Germany to a discussion about the borders of Europe and how to close them. And when people who drowned in the Mediterranean made it into the news, then it was mostly very short and very brief, because people in Germany were, I think, kind of tired and kind of, I don't know if overwhelmed is the right word, but people had become kind of numb to the news of people dying. And with the film that I made is to raise awareness for the reasons why people, you know, made the journey across the sea, why people had to flee, and why people did not, you know, stay in countries like Lebanon, but rather decided to take the more dangerous route and try to leave. I mean, unfortunately, I was hoping when I released the video to reach more people, quite as many people as I was hoping for. I also released the film on Instagram, where also a couple of people saw it, but not as many as I would have hoped for before.
So as journalists, you have contact to all crises worldwide right now, and I think it is getting even worse to get more attention for Syrian. We're going to talk about this a little bit later on. I want to ask Marie-Claude, when you see those footage from 2019, maybe you can give us an insight. Is it still kind of the same, or did something change?
It is the same because of the current crisis. The Lebanese people are also suffering, is hitting the Syrian refugees and the Lebanese people. So what Florian said about we are all tired, it is true. Unfortunately or fortunately, in Lebanon, now we are all on the same boat, the refugees and the hosting community. So what has changed positively is that the Lebanese don't look, no, a lot of Lebanese look at the Syrian like a burden, but a lot of Lebanese to look at the Syrian as their fellow people in the crisis. And the Syrian don't look anymore at Lebanon as a wealthy country. They look also at Lebanon as a country in crisis. So I think that, I don't know if Hanadi agree with me, that the crisis, Al-Azami, have made in one part a feeling of we are tired.
Sorry, I can't I want to translate Mary. بداية الحرب بسوريا كانت لبنان متأثر بشكل مباشر فيها بسبب الضغط الاقتصادي وعدد اللاجئين اللي عم يتزايد كان يوم بعد يوم على لبنان، وهي بلد أصلاً بيعاني من أوضاع اقتصادية صعبة، وبالتالي حجم أزمة اللجوء عم يتفاقم وعم يتضخم بلبنان. المشاكل الاقتصادية already موجودة، المشاكل الاجتماعية، التركيب الاجتماعي كمان، كان هي التراكمات عم تخلق هيدي الصعوبات عند اللبنانيين لحتى يتم استيعاب هذا العدد المتضخم والكبير من اللاجئين السوريين.
The things they experience together, the crisis they experienced together, made them grow closer together. Can you just give us an update? How many refugees are living in the Lebanon right now?
I think, but I am not sure because there is a lot of figures, but I think that they still 1 million of Syrian refugees. Not all lives in the camp.
أنا بدي أكد على الرابط القوي بين لبنان وسوريا. هو لبنان عبارة عن مساحة آمنة للاجئين السوريين. دعم اللي تلقيناهم كلاجئين سوريين بتمثل أول شيء بالاحتضان المجتمعي من خلال توفير الخدمات الأساسية، وخاصة ببرنامج التعليم للاجئين السوريين من خلال برنامج ألفا KNH. كان عم يزودوا طلاب بالخدمات التعليمية اللي والأزمة اللي خلقت الانقطاع عن التعلم، بالإضافة إلى خدمات الدعم النفسي والاجتماعي. طلاب كانت عم تعاني من مرحلة انقطاع بالتعليم، طلعوا من مجموعة من الصدمات من الأزمات النفسية نتيجة الحرب بسوريا اللي عاشوها. بتحبي الترجمة وبرجع كمان.
I would like to bring in Ferdinand Dürr at this point. I think he can tell us a little bit more about the situation in Syria, because you are in contact with the different groups in Syria right now. Is this correct?
Yes, with Adopt a Revolution, we were in contact with around about 40 local committees. Like these were the revolutionary committees in the beginning of the Syrian uprising in 2011, 2012. And still are in contact with around about 13, 14 projects which stem from these LCC, local coordination committees, back then, more than 10 years ago. And it's totally true what we heard so far. It is a catastrophic situation in Syria. It's like nothing I can say against that. Like, it's an economic crisis. We've got a political crisis, which is, you know, an ongoing, and really, this is one of the most repressive dictatorships we have in the world. Like, think of North Korea and think of Syria as like the examples of how repressive dictatorships can be. And this is something that people in Syria still feel, even though in 2011 they were brave enough to try an uprising. And you know, and from, I think one really has to understand what people were daring to do in 2011, to go in the streets and demand freedom, democracy, human rights, to demand a unity also of the people, because the regime was always playing very well the different population groups against each other. And yeah, driving out millions of Syrians who showed their oppositional position, their oppositional political position, is a strategy of the Assad regime. And when we look at different regions of Syria, people are suffering everywhere. They are suffering in regime-held areas. They are suffering in the northeast, where like Kurdish self-controlled areas, and they are also suffering in the northwest, where some Islamist groups still have the boots on the ground. So there's nothing really I can add to the description that we already heard. Same things that apply in Lebanon are applying in Syria, with probably the slight difference that there's less international access. There are less international organizations active there, especially in regime-held areas, because they simply cannot operate freely there. If they are operating there, they always instrumentalized in the sense of supporting the regime, and the regime is always using also resources that are coming from international community, from the UN, for their own benefits. But also in the northwest, like in the Idlib and northern Aleppo region, international NGOs simply cannot as operate as freely as they, for example, can in Lebanon. So the situation is very complex in Lebanon, and it is probably even a little bit more complex in Syria. But taking it all together, we have to understand that this is a political crisis, and this stems from corrupt dictatorships, probably a bit different in Lebanon, with a system of different parties having built up this corruption over decades, where really besides civil society, no one really is trying to change something in the whole country. And I think this is the reason why we do still need a strong civil society in Lebanon to actually have a chance to change something.
You were 15 when you fled Syria. How is it to be so many years in another country, and do you have still hope to get back to Syria?
بداية أكيد في عنا يعني كنا بنحب نرجع على بلدنا، بس بالوقت الحالي نحن كثير صعب نكون عم نفكر نرجع بسبب انهيار البنى التحتية بسوريا، بسبب انعدام خدمات التعليم، انعدام الأمن والأمان، ما في أي أسباب للعودة آمنة. فهذا الشيء بيخلينا نكون بالمجتمع اللي احتضننا هون، مع العائلة، مع الأصدقاء الجدد، مع أساتذتنا بالجامعات، مع زملائنا بالعمل اللي صار في عم نبني أساس لحتى نساعد هدول الطلاب ليرجعوا يفكروا، يرجعوا بوقت يستقروا، يرجعوا يبنوا ويأسسوا بلدهم من أول وجديد. بس بالوضع الحالي السياق العام كثير صعب. بصراحة نحن بفترة الدراسة كانت تظهر قذائف على مدارسنا، فذاكرة الحرب في خلقت رعب داخل الأطفال، يعني داخل الأطفال اللي جواتنا. فبعد 10 سنين ما بعرف إذا يمكن بيرجع إحساس الأمان اللي انحرمناه بالطفولة نقدر نرجع نكون عم نفوت على مدارس سوريا، نفوت أولادنا على نفس المدارس.
Mr. Do you know anybody who actually got back to Syria, and do you have contact with somebody, and how do they manage?
Yes, actually we are in contact with a few people who returned to Syria, and we are in contact with people who actually returned to regime-held areas, but most of the people who returned to the Kurdish-controlled northeast. So this is like the area where we've got most stability. That is, you know, Syria is still in a state of war. There is fighting every day. This is not to be forgotten. Most people in Europe think, especially since the Ukrainian crisis started, that war in Syria is over. But this is not true. There is bombing, there is shelling, there is shooting every day. Every day people are being killed. And this insecurity is something that is playing in the cards of the Assad regime. And yeah, like people who return say that they're doing it only for like strong sentiments, for example, towards their family, going back to see their old parents again before they die, something like that. And then often people are only doing it if they have the chance to leave again afterwards, for example, going back to Lebanon. People didn't want to flee in the first place. They fled because they didn't see a future anymore in Syria, in the neighboring countries. And they had the chance to come to Europe. But this is not what they wanted to do, but they really want to return. However, under the conditions as we have them at the moment, it seems hardly possible. They are in a way risking their security, their lives. They are risking to be imprisoned, to be tortured, to be killed, to disappear, because this is also what happens in Syria, like every day. And yeah, if there are people who are doing that, who are trying that, then they always try to keep a foot outside so that they've got the possibility to return afterwards.